Welcome to the next in our whiteboard series on the Reformation. Today, part 2 on the Radical Reformation with a focus on the Anabaptists. I want to start first with the Swiss Anabaptists. This group emerged particularly in Zurich, and it's important to realize that the early Swiss Anabaptists were actually strong partisans of Huldrych Zwingli, the Zurich reformer. They were his friends, they were his students, they were people who admired him greatly, and they really took his path of reformation. So in some sense it seems odd that there was such a big split, because if they liked him and they supported him, why would it fall apart? Well, it fell apart because these followers, these students, these enthusiasts felt that Zwingli was dragging his feet, that he was not really following the Reformation to its logical conclusion, that he was not being fully faithful to Scripture, that he was too willing to slow things down, to wait for the magistrates or wait for the wider population. The Anabaptists were, come on, let's go, let's make the Reformation happen in its fullest extent. And they particularly broke with Zwingli over the idea of infant baptism. Zwingli said infant baptism must be maintained. He said it's akin to the sign of the covenant, just as circumcision was for the ancient Israelites, so baptism is for the children of the covenant. It is the sign of the covenant. But the Anabaptists said no. They said there's no evidence of Jesus baptizing any children. There's no evidence of infant baptism in the New Testament. It's not biblical. It's not right. You have to have belief before you can have baptism. It doesn't work to baptize babies. And they said no. They said they wouldn't do this. In fact, by 1525, after a debate in the city of Zurich over baptism, the Anabaptists, the Swiss Anabaptists, these followers of Zwingli who felt he was not going far enough, they got together separately and they began to baptize one another. In doing so, they were putting themselves at great risk. Because, of course, each of them, born in a Catholic pre-Reformation world, had been baptized as infants. So this adult baptism that they were doing was a rebaptism. And rebaptism was illegal and punishable by death across all of Europe, because it was implicitly a rejection of that first sacramental baptism. The Zurich authorities told the Swiss Anabaptists to stop doing this, to stop preaching, to stop disrupting things, to stop doing these adult baptism, and they refused. The end result was imprisonment, and for some of them, death, including Felix Manz, a young patrician of Zurich, executed by drowning in the Limmat River in 1527. Other Anabaptists fled, spread the movement far and wide. The ideas of Anabaptism were already sort of percolating and circulating, and there's not really one starting point. It's almost as if it popped up in all sorts of different places. By 1527, you have the Schleitheim Confession, which was put together under the leadership of a man called Michael Sattler, and it essentially lays out the key beliefs that held the Anabaptists together. It was almost a rallying point for Anabaptists. Now, the Swiss Anabaptists moved out further afield. Some of them went to Moravia, created communities. The Hutterites, for instance, emerged from that. But in other areas, particularly in the German and the Dutch areas, Anabaptists became more radicalized. And they had a strong current of apocalypticism, that the end of the world was nigh, right? And their radical ideas kind of fed into this. And they thought Christ was going to return very soon. His second coming was imminent. And they essentially wanted that to happen, wanted to see that happen, were fervent to see that happen. And some of them decided that, in fact, Christ's second coming was so imminent that it was going to take place in the German lands, in the city of Münster. Now, Münster was a city that had been Catholic, that had transitioned to being Lutheran, but enough partisans of Anabaptism, this radical movement, got together that they essentially forced the city from Lutheranism to Anabaptism. Folks who favored Lutheranism fled, much of the city government fled, and the Anabaptist leaders took the stage in Münster. They were, however, quickly besieged by Catholic and Lutheran forces, united for once on we don't like Anabaptists, especially not these radical ones. The Münster Anabaptists, under pressure of various kinds, spiritual pressure, physical pressure, the siege, went to certain extremes, including polygamy. And the siege was very brutal, very hard, and the end result was that the Anabaptists were crushed and their leaders were executed in various gruesome ways, and their corpses were exhibited in a tower in Münster, in iron cages. The impact of Münster was such that Anabaptists had a hard time recovering from that. Because for years afterwards, whenever you said the word Anabaptists, people heard Münster, and they thought about that siege and that debacle and all the wild ideas that had come from there. So Anabaptism had a really hard time making progress after Münster.